Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the second webinar of the Your Best Just Got Better online program. I want to say thank you so much for tuning in, signing up, and really engaging at full force in this program. So what I want to do is I want to go through the second of the four webinars, give you a little bit of background. And again, the whole purpose of these is to not only go through some of the more poignant stories within the book, but also give you some of the backstory. And at 270 pages, of course, I had to leave some out. So by signing up for the Your Best Just Got Better online program, what I'll do is give you as much more of that as possible. So one of the things that I like to remind everybody is that I am abundantly available. I want to make sure that everyone knows how to get in touch, how to contact, and so there you've got my phone number, my email address. If there's anything that I can do, please do let me know throughout the entire program. And moving forward, we had this in the first webinar, and I just want to come back to it because this is going to be a real important reminder to us. And that's to step back and really identify for ourselves, what does the word better mean? And if you go ahead and look that up in the dictionary, if you want to pull out a extra page in your journal or go to a whiteboard or a flip chart, the best way that I've seen people do this, and this is how I run it in the seminars, I actually want you to write down what your philosophy of improvement, of what your definition of the word better, but how would you explain that to your 7-year-old niece or nephew, right? So they come in, and I've got a couple, I've got a niece and a nephew, and if little Carly comes in, she's about to turn, actually she just turned 7, and if she said, Uncle Jason, what does better mean? Well, I would want to be able to share with her what it is I think better means. And it goes beyond the grass is greener on the other side. It goes beyond, oh, someday, one day things will be better. And it's fascinating. There's a great book out there I read many years ago by a woman named Carol Dweck. I highly recommend you pick up this book, but it's called Mindset. And one of the things that I remember reading about this book was the absolute significance of what happens when you are raising a child and the things that you talk about as parents, the things that you argue about as parents, the things that you celebrate as parents. All of that goes in and it starts to become bank account that then your kids pull out and the deposit and the withdrawal, right? What goes in and what comes out. And so really identifying what does you at your best mean, and then what is going to happen? How do you put that on some kind of a program to make it even better? So of course the book is written in 3 different parts and in 10 different chapters. Part 1 is work smarter, 2 is think bigger, 3 is make more, and each one of these has its own elements. And really the way I designed this experience, not just the book but also the online education program, is if you step back and you look at, well, how do I work smarter? And what can I do in order to really move things forward in that positive direction that I'm moving in? And then the second thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that our thinking is then going along with how we're working. And so the idea that we call thinking bigger, all that means is that we're taking the time that we're now saving, the energy that we're now saving, the focus that we can now apply. And when we sit down at our desk, when we sit down with our team, when we sit down with our family, we're expanding the thinking. Oftentimes I'll say in seminars, do you know anybody who likes to complain? And by nature, complainers think smaller. Complainers think that things should be different, but they're not willing to put the activities or the actions or the definitions behind what that would look, sound, or feel like. And then as we move into this part about making more, and every single person has their own definition of what more means to them. And to some people, making more means more memories. It means more clients. It means more money. It means more days of vacation. Remember, I was working with a client in Europe, and when we were talking about his goals for our work together, he said, Jason, what would mean success to me is if I was home 3 nights a week instead of 2 nights a week for dinner with my family. And I thought, what an interesting way of taking a look at what his best getting better meant. He wasn't going to go from 2 nights to 7 nights overnight. He was saying, if I could chip away, chip away. And you'll read about this later on in the book where I talk about the process of iterative improvement. The fact that we're not going to change everything right away, but by using some of the tactics and strategies from this book about working smarter and thinking bigger. So for this webinar, I'm going to spend the next, about 20 minutes or so just sharing what I believe working smarter, thinking bigger, and how those two things combine. In webinars 3 and 4, that's when we're going to dive down a little bit deeper, and then we'll bridge the gap between thinking bigger and making more. And so the first thing that I like to remind myself is there's this saying of, when I was a kid and I was learning how to play baseball, I was learning how to play guitar, I even took some art classes, and they kept telling me, Jason, if you practice over and over again, if you practice over and over again, they told me that practice made perfect. What I've found over the years is, in fact, practice makes habit. Practice makes comfortable. And so the first thing that we need to take a look at is, what is it that we're comfortable doing? What's comfortable to us? What time do we show up to work? What time do meetings start when they say they were going to start? How long is the gap between when a client emails me and she or he can expect a return? And I like to remind myself that I'm comfortable the way I'm working because that's the way that I've been working. I already gave you one book recommendation. That was Mindset by a woman named Carol Dweck. She works out of the Silicon Valley in California. Another book that comes to my mind right here is, again, we're looking at habits and how things have become the way they are. And my mentor, Marshall Goldsmith, wrote a fantastic book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And by the way, as you move through the book, I know you're probably just in about chapter 2 or 3 right now, but when we get to chapter 5, I'm actually going to do a spin on that title because my thesis is, who got you here may not get you there. You see, we're comfortable the way we're working because that's the way we've been working. We've been working around those people that we've been working around. We've attracted the kinds of clients that we've attracted up till now. And so what I'd like to do is take a look at, if I were going to change anything, if you were going to change your routines, your practices, or your habits, it might be valuable to take a look at what your current practices are. So let me give you the first tactic in this webinar, and this one is it's a assessment, really. Pull out a blank piece of paper, open up an Excel spreadsheet, or get a flip chart behind you at your desk's office space there. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to write down by 10 a.m. up on the top of that piece of paper, or up on top of that Word document, and write down who you connect with, spend time with. And I mean from the time you wake up in the morning till about 10 a.m. And by the way, I'm just going for middle of the day here. I'm going for, you get up in the morning and then you move through your morning motions, you get to the office, and then you take that first morning break. Some people that's 10:30, some people it's 9:30, but I'm looking for that mid-morning cycle, whenever that is. So the first thing you do is you make a long list. I mean, who is it that you connect with? And you'd want to put client groups, you'd want to put coworkers, you'd want to put family members, you'd want to put community leaders, whoever it is that by 10 a.m. most mornings you anticipate you're going to hear from, connect with, be in touch with. The next thing you're going to write down, and by the way, you might already be at half a page long here, so just keep on going, is what do you do? What do you put your attention on? What gets your focus? And if you take that mid-morning marker, I mean, for some people, they've already been up for 5 hours. If you get up at 5, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, you've got between 4 and 5 hours behind you already that has taken your focus. So what do you do? And here you're going to talk about things like, what do you read? What do you listen to? What do you look at? What do you physically finish? What do you start? And then the third one is, where do you go work? Or where are you? And so I'm thinking about, clients that I work with who have a bit of a commute to the office, and maybe on their way they stop at a coffee shop, and that's kind of a double activity. One, they go in and say hello to the barista and get their cup of coffee or cappuccino or latte or whatever they get, but maybe they sit down for 5 or 10 minutes. Anybody out there in the service industry where gaining clientele in your local community, I could suggest a 5-day experiment. For the next 5 days, as you're walking, driving, commuting to the office, stop at some local breakfast place or coffee shop and set your timer for just 15 minutes. Remember, that's 1% of your day. That's all. And while you're sitting there sipping on your cup of coffee or eating your bagel or whatever that is, leave your materials somewhere out. I do this all the time, right? I go to a coffee shop and I'll sit down with my latte and cup of oatmeal and I'll just leave a copy of my book on the table. And invariably, someone will come by, look at the book, look at me, and I'm in a customer-based relationship business. We might be able to strike up a conversation. I might be able to hand them a copy of the book to bring back to their office. Now, once you identify what these habits or routines are, then you can start to take a look at how you're managing your time by managing action. I think too often people have tried to manage time in isolation. And this is where such tactics as time blocking or prioritization, those were really popular because it was taking a look at what we thought we could manage. We used to think we could manage 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. We used to think we could manage 2:30 to 3:30. But really what we're finding now is we're managing what happens between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. How many phone calls do you receive? How many emails do you send? How many pieces of paper do you move from one side of the desk to the other? And as you're moving through the day, you're really managing action, which takes time. If that's one thing that you walked away from this seminar with, is reminding yourself that in time we do things. Now, by the way, if you've ever said or if you ever heard anybody say that they wish they had time to do nothing, I hope you understand the fallibility in that statement by looking at this slide. When we manage time, we manage action. If you had time to do nothing, you'd actually do something. For some of you, if you had nothing time, you'd read a book, you'd watch a TV show, you'd go for a walk with your kids, you'd write a letter to someone that you haven't talked to in a while. You might cruise across your social media websites of LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. But if we had time to do nothing, we'd do something. By the way, that's why I always suggest that you keep with you, wherever you are, at your desk, at home, in your briefcase or purse, bring 1 or 2 15-minute tasks. If I get an extra 15 minutes, I can write a couple thank you cards, I can read about a chapter of a book. If I get an extra 15-minute block of time, I can make a phone call to someone that I haven't talked to in a little while. I could do an extra 15 minutes on the treadmill if I get that extra 1% of my day. Remembering that there are only 96 15-minute blocks of time in a day, that really works for me as a filter. It's an arbiter of what I will or won't focus on. So it's really significant that I stop, I step back, I take a look, and I ask myself, okay, what am I going to do during those blocks of time? And again, just as a quick reminder, why 15 minutes? Why is that so important? Well, to me, 15 minutes is actually long enough to do something. I can actually sit down and focus, and in 900 seconds, that's it, by the way. Not a long time, right? But in 900 seconds of focused thought, I might be able to get through 20 pages of that book that I need to read. I might be able to reply to 3 of those big emails that someone is waiting for my awareness, consciousness, or focus on. And then the other side of this, so A, 96 15-minute blocks. A, 15-minute blocks is long enough to matter. And then B, it's short enough to find. I promise in the next 24 hours, someone's going to be late to a meeting, you're going to arrive somewhere early, or you're going to get a last-minute cancellation. And those are the 3 things that I'm looking for. If I can get somewhere early, if they show up late, or if I get a last-minute cancellation, I've just opened up anywhere between 1 and 6 extra 15-minute blocks of time. Now, we'll give you a little caution flag here. I've actually had people who tried to do time blocking on their calendar. They tried to do their own blocking of those 15 minutes, maybe 4 of those or even 6 of those in a row. Like maybe you've ever put on your calendar, work time from 9 to 10. The only problem I have with that is it's still in that noun-based orientation. So if I put down on my calendar work time, or if I put the name of a project that I'm going to work on between 9 and 10, I'm halfway there, maybe I'm 25% of the way there. What I really need to do is step back and say, okay, in an hour, here are the 4 15-minute tasks that I'm going to work on. Here is task A, task B, and so on. That way, when I sit down to work in that 1 hour, I'm not left wondering what to do. I'm left with a task list. I remember when I worked in construction, my uncle hired me for several summers, and I only made it to journeyman carpenter. I didn't even get to apprentice. I mean, I was just, you know, I was doing it for a summer job. But what I remember very distinctly looking back is how significant it was for my uncle to give me the work that he needed done in the order he needed it done in without me having to think, wonder, or remember anything. And so literally, he would line up the day. Oh, by the way, he did tell me years later that he was paying me for 8 hours of work. He would always leave me between 9 and 10 hours of work, and I would never finish. So I'd always get to the end of the day, and I had a little bit more to do. And he said, Jason, later on, he said, I wanted you to always have more to do because if you wound up getting through the 7 hours of work, then you would have been done for the day. So that's just a quick aside on that one. Remember, there's two kinds of work that you do. There's the noun orientation and the verb orientation. And I covered this in detail in the first webinar. You may want to go back and take a listen to that. Watch that one more time because I really think it's important that we step back. We realize what our orientation is. B, we wonder and start to qualify what the orientation of others is. But then C, we work most effectively to get the right things done during each day. So whatever it is that you think you're engaged in, whatever it is that you think you're working on, that's what's going to grab most of your attention. And one of the activities in the book, and hopefully you've made it there by now, it's in chapter 3 of Your Best Just Got Better. And that's where I talk about this concept of the productivity profile. And your productivity profile, your own personal assessment of what you do and how you do it is really important. And just a little bit of the backstory behind this. I tell the story in the book, but see if I can add a little bit here. I've attended the conference in Austin it's in March every year, called South by Southwest for several years now. In fact, the book, Your Best Just Got Better, I pitched at South by Southwest to a publisher, and he was the one who wound up representative of Wiley, and he wound up taking my book. So I've had some really good things happen at South by. The other good thing that happened a couple of years ago was I realized that there's a productivity profile that I had. The productivity profile that everybody has, in fact. And what I did is I looked at what it is that if I look in the mirror and I see me, what is it that I always have with me? And what I did is there was this activity at South by Southwest. It was a booth in the conference center. So if you've ever been to one of these trade shows where you walk through that big auditorium and every single booth is trying to get your name and your email address and your phone number because they want to send you something, get you on a mailing list. Well, I usually walk through those things kind of head down, don't make eye contact until I saw this one. It was a CNN booth. And the activity was we were given the opportunity to put on a table the 9 things that we always had with us. And it was kind of a way to see your own cultural artifact. Who are you in the scheme of the community? And what I did is I started laying things on the table. And in the book, I talk about the things that I had. I had a bottle of water. I had my Metro cards for the BART system in San Francisco, the Tube in London, the Metro in Washington, D.C., and the subway in New York. I mean, I didn't know it, but I carry all of those in my wallet because within a couple of weeks, I'll be back in one of those cities. And there were a lot of other things that I always carried with me. But here was the interesting thing. CNN was running this as a cultural anthropological viewpoint of the kinds of things that we were working in and living in and using in this kind of consumeristic society. I looked at this through a different lens. I realized, oh my goodness, what's on that table, those things represent why time management is important to me. Why is it significant to Jason that he always has a bottle of water, that he always has a notebook, that he always has a digital camera? Well, I love health, I love writing things down, and I love to capture moments in time digitally, photographically. And what I've realized in my coaching practice now is if I sit down with a client and we go through what is in their wallet, their purse, their briefcase, their backpack, open up the drawers of your desk. Open the drawers, by the way, start with the drawers that you have not emptied, looked at, or even used in the past week. Now, you thought I was going to say something longer, I bet. But seriously, if there's a drawer in your office that you haven't opened in the past 7 days, I might push on you a little bit. Do you need the stuff that's in that drawer? Now, you're probably going to say yes to 90 or even 80% of the stuff in there. And again, we talk about the Pareto principle, right? The 80-20 rule. That is 20% of what we have is used for 80% of what we produce. So if I think about the books in my bookshelf, there's probably a good 20% of all of those books that have influenced over 80% of how I look at the world and what I view. I mean, in this one webinar, I've only mentioned 2 books, right? I've talked about Mindset by Carol Dweck, a great book when it comes to that whole philosophy of how you take a look at the world and where that comes from. And the second one was the book by Marshall Goldsmith called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. So when you start this concept of looking at yourself and going into the mirror and really having that honest conversation, I'd really like you to take a moment and see yourself in your goals. Actually see you. And I've always said that there are 3 kinds of goals that people set and 3 kinds of achievements that they get to. And the first kind of a goal that we set is the goal that we think about. And on your way to work this morning, or maybe you're already future forecasting into the weekend, but you might be thinking about a goal you have, about some direction you're heading in, about somewhere you're going. The second kind of goal that people have is obviously the goal they think about, and then they write it. They write it on a piece of paper, they write it on a post-it, they put it on a whiteboard, maybe they send themselves an email, they drop a note on their calendar for a reminder next week. It's the goals that you write down. Second kind of goals. And then the third kind of goals are these. They're the goals that you see yourself in. And so, again, I talk about this activity in the book. I hope you'll give it a try. And if you do, please email me and let me know how it goes. Standing in front of a mirror in your office, a mirror in your bathroom, a mirror at home. And what you do is you take an Expo whiteboard pens. The pens, they're called dry erase pens. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to stand in front of the mirror and actually look yourself in your eye. Look at you and gaze into that person across those 2 feet of space. And then around you, right there on the mirror, start to write your goals. And I need you to write them close to your face. I know this is going to sound a little bit odd, but just give it a try and see what happens. Because what I'd like you to do is be able to read your goals while you see yourself. And I'll pitch this as a 5-day experiment. For the next 5 days, right before you go to sleep at night, stand in front of the mirror and write down what it is that you'd like to achieve, the results you'd like to get, what you'd like to move toward in the next 24 hours. The next morning, you look at those again, you look at you look at those, you go to work, you leave the house, you'll come back home, and that night, as you're getting ready for bed or as you're finishing the day, you review, well, these were the goals that I set for myself last night. You assess, how did I do today? You erase those, and then you do it again for tomorrow. And just try this for 5 nights, just to see what happens. Essentially, what I'm going to encourage you to do is to influence your way toward success. It's the idea that behind us is a solid booster. I remember a TED Talk, and if you haven't watched any of the TED Talks this week, just jump on over in your Internet Explorer, your Firefox, or Chrome, or whatever your web browser is. Type in TED.com, TED, and watch a video or 2. And I remember the significance of sitting down and letting those words spill out from the computer, listening to how people are moving toward where they're going. And if it's not abundantly clear, let me just one more time remind us, your normal, what you expect, what you accept, is months or maybe even years or possibly even decades in the making. No, seriously, what you know as normal is just based on the experience of what you've repeated over and over again. And so if you're looking to the future, if you're looking into the next 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years, if you can anticipate that normal will be different, well, then we start now and we start to influence our way towards that success, towards that next level. You've seen this before, you've read about it in the book, but just a quick reminder that there are 3 different ways that we get influenced. And one of the ways that we influence ourselves is by studying what is normal, what is our homeostatic norm. And by the way, that's why at the beginning of this webinar, I wanted you to go through that activity of the by 10 a.m. Because by 10 a.m. activity, if you'll really write down what you do, where you go, and who you spend time with, then you'll start to recognize what your norm is. And then you can start to play around with it. Maybe you want to move it up a little bit, maybe you want to move it back a little bit. The context is an absolute influencer. I just got an email yesterday from a client that I met in New York. He was working in London. He flew to New York and we spent some time together. He was just assigned to an office in India. And he's already telling me that the context when he was working in New York versus when he was working in London, now that he's working in India, the context has a huge influence on his productivity, on his workflow management, on his time management. And I'm going to save the network piece for the next webinar because that's in chapter 5 of the book, and we're going to spend a lot of time in that direction. So in just a moment, I'm going to end this slide presentation and we'll go into any questions or comments that you have about where we're going. And just to give you a little slice of what's coming at us in the future, we're going to be taking a look at the next 2 parts of the book, Think Bigger and Make More. And when we're thinking bigger, just to give you a little bit of background about what you can expect there, is we're going to go back to and reflect on your own role in thinking bigger. So we're going to review chapter 1 as we move into chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. We're going to have to reflect on pacing. And chapter 2, that's what pacing was all about. So as we are working smarter, we're working more intelligently, we're being very effective, we're going to move into this concept of bigger thinking, and that might require that we slow down a little bit so that we can speed up. And then the third one that we'll talk about, of course, is that social network. And if you kind of think to yourself, I'll plant some seeds of thought, that describing of your ideal day. And I know it might seem like such a long time ago that you read the prologue to the book, but that was just a sample of what an ideal day was according to my own experience. And then, of course, at the end of chapter 1, we talked about the at my best when. And what else can you expect as we go forward? We're going to work on clarifying what that would look like over there. And you see I put there in quotes. And when you're moving toward that point, when you're getting from where you are to where you want to be, it's absolutely critical that we identify what there looks like and understanding that. Again, just a couple of points that we can look forward to as you're entering in the next section of the book. We look at the 3 different kinds of work, right? Earlier on, we took a look at the different approaches to thinking about work. So we have the nouns and the verbs, and then we go into these next 2 levels, the work that you're managing through time, and then the work that you're doing as the tasks or the priorities. The last thing that I'll talk about here is this concept of the real social network. Not social media network, but the real social network. And if you want to go far, go together. This is a comment that you'll see in our company. Jody and I, we started our company a while back, and we just thought it was so important that we come together because we know that if she can look at something and I look at something, we approach that same thing from 2 different perspectives, that it was easier to be able to see our way from here to there. So that's going to be it for this particular webinar. Hopefully within the past 30 minutes you've gotten a couple of ideas of the things that you could do to make your best better. What I'll do now is I'll end the slide presentation and then I'll open up if there's any questions or comments. Obviously, easy to stay in touch. You can always text message or email or see anything on our website for further information.